The morning of my graduation began with a kind of nervous hopefulness, the fragile sort that shakes quietly beneath your ribs. I had spent years imagining this day, the first in my family to earn a university degree, the one moment where all my late nights, my scholarships, my Raymond dinners, and my lonely holidays would be seen. A moment that felt like proof I hadn't struggled for nothing. I had called my family the week before, reminding them of the exact time, the location, even where I had reserved seats with little gold name cards I wrote myself, just in case they forgot. I wanted to believe they'd show up proud. I wanted it so badly I ignored the small voice inside me that whispered they never had before. I remember standing in front of the mirror, adjusting my gown, tracing the embroidered crest with the tip of my finger. It felt like touching a dream I wasn't sure I deserved. The cap sat slightly crooked on my head, but I didn't fix it. I thought my mother would laugh and straighten it later, the way she used to before school picture days. That tiny memory carried me all the way to the ceremony, tucked in the back pocket of my heart like a reminder that maybe, just maybe, I mattered to them. The auditorium buzzed with noise, families greeting one another, siblings waving handmade posters, cameras flashing every few seconds. It was loud, warm, almost overwhelming. I stood at the entrance hugging my diploma folder against my chest, scanning the rows with a hopeful smile. People were finding their families and being wrapped in arms that held pride and softness. I searched for my own, any familiar face, any sign they were looking for me too. Nothing. I checked my phone, no new messages. I convinced myself they were on their way, stuck in traffic maybe, or circling for parking. I kept replaying those explanations until they sounded true. I walked across the stage when my name was called, my smile so stiff it felt like it might crack. The applause echoed through the hall, but it wasn't for me. Not really. It was applause from strangers, filling the space where my family should have been. I held my diploma with hands that felt too light, too empty. After the ceremony, I lingered. I watched other graduates embrace their families, cry into their mothers' shoulders, pose for pictures they'd frame later. I kept standing there, pretending I was waiting for someone running late. But the hall grew quieter. The crowds thinned, and the seats I had reserved with those gold name cards remained untouched, the cards curling slightly at the edges like they were embarrassed for me. My phone buzzed once. Relief flashed through me, until I read the message from my cousin. She apologized, and then she told me the truth. My family hadn't forgotten. They had chosen not to come. They thought I needed to be humbled. As if pride was a crime, as if my success was something ugly they didn't want to acknowledge. I didn't cry. Not then. Something inside me simply shut down, a door closing in a silent, final way. I walked out of the auditorium into the sunlight, feeling the weight of that empty day settle deep into my bones. And with every step I took away from that place, the idea formed quietly, but fiercely I didn't have to stay in a life where the people closest to me chose to look away. I didn't have to remain Ariel Jennings. By the time I reached the edge of campus, I already knew I wouldn't be going home. Changing my name felt like stepping out of my own skin, like shedding a layer that had grown too tight and too bruised to keep wearing. When the clerk at the courthouse stamped the final document and slid it toward me, I stared at the new name printed across the page, Aria Linden. It looked like it belonged to someone braver, someone lighter, someone who hadn't spent her whole life waiting to matter. I folded the paper carefully, almost reverently, and tucked it into my bag. It was the only possession I owned that felt like a beginning instead of a reminder. I bought a one-way bus ticket with the last of the money in my account. The ride was long, hours stitched together by the hum of the engine and the blur of unfamiliar landscapes outside the window. Every road sign, every exit, every passing town made me feel farther from the girl I used to be. I didn't know where I was going exactly, only that it would be nowhere my family could find me. The bus finally stopped in a small city with bright murals on the buildings and streets filled with people who had somewhere to be. I chose it simply because I liked the way it felt to step into a place where no one knew my name, old or new. Finding work was harder than I expected. I walked into shop after shop, filling out applications with the name I was still getting used to writing. Most places weren't hiring. Some didn't look at me long enough to care. But eventually, a cafe tucked between a thrift store and a plant shop offered me a position washing dishes and clearing tables. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. Enough to afford a tiny room above a garage. Enough to keep me fed. Enough to keep me moving. The cafe became my second home before I realized it. The air always smelled like coffee beans and vanilla syrup. My fingers were constantly stained with espresso, and more than once I ended up with burns from the steam wand. But I didn't mind. Work kept my hands busy and my mind from drifting to memories that hurt. Slowly, I learned to make drinks, to take orders, to laugh without feeling guilty. It was the people there who began piecing me back together. Harper taught me how to pull a decent espresso shot and teased me every time I forgot the difference between a macchiato and a cortado. Matteo came in each morning at 8 sharp, ordering the same plain coffee and telling me stories from decades ago, stories filled with dance halls and heartbreaks, and moments he survived even when he shouldn't have. And then there was June, the social worker who visited the cafe 3 times a week with stacks of case files and a tired smile. She asked questions gently, noticing more than I ever said out loud. One day, after listening to me talk with a homeless teenager who wandered inside for warmth, she told me, "You have a way of hearing people, really hearing them. You'd be good at what I do." The compliment felt like a spark in a dark room, small but bright enough to see by. Soon after, I began volunteering at the youth shelter where she worked. It started with simple tasks, handing out meals, organizing supplies, talking with the kids who didn't trust adults anymore. But even in those early days, something inside me shifted. I recognized the look in their eyes, the mixture of hope and anger and confusion. The feeling of wondering if the world had a place for you after all. At the shelter, I wasn't Ariel, the forgotten daughter. I wasn't Aria, the runaway with a new name. I was simply someone who cared, someone who understood, someone who stayed. And for the first time in my life, staying felt like a choice I was allowed to make. Success has a strange way of making the past take notice. At first, the youth program I helped build was small. Just a few workshops held in a borrowed room with mismatched chairs. But the kids kept coming. Word spread. Some of them brought friends who had nowhere else to go after school. Others came because they liked how it felt to be in a place where nobody asked them to prove their worth. Over time, those borrowed spaces turned into a rented office. The office turned into partnerships. And those partnerships eventually blossomed into something bigger than I ever expected, a community initiative that people actually cared about. We called it the Chosen Ones. The name came from a late-night conversation with one of the teens, a quiet girl named Lena who whispered, "No one picked me for anything, not even as a baby. I just was there." Her words lodged in my chest, sharp and unforgettable. When the idea of naming the program came up, the choice was obvious. The Chosen Ones, a declaration for every kid who had ever felt like an afterthought. A promise that they mattered. When a local reporter asked to do a feature on our work, I hesitated. I still lived quietly, almost cautiously, as if speaking too loudly might draw the shadows of my past back toward me. But the kids wanted it, the shelter staff encouraged it, and so I agreed, thinking it would appear in some small section of the newspaper that no one from my old life would ever see. I was wrong. The story gained traction online, shared, reposted, liked by people I didn't know. It wasn't fame, not in any glamorous sense, but it was visibility. Enough visibility to reach the corners of the world I had abandoned. The first message came from an old classmate I barely remembered. "Is this you? You look like Ariel." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Another message followed the next day. And another, some curious, some supportive, some confused, all of them clawing at a part of my identity I thought I had buried. Then came the message I had feared, though I hadn't admitted it aloud. From my mother. "We saw you on TV, call us. We're proud of you." Proud. The word looked wrong coming from her, like she had borrowed it from someone who actually meant it. My hands shook as I read her message, not from fear, but from a strange, rising anger, soft at first, then sharp as it settled in my bones. They hadn't been proud when I graduated alone. They hadn't been proud when I fought through school without their help. They hadn't been proud when I clawed my way out of the life they made unbearable. They were proud now because it benefited them. I didn't respond. I didn't even consider it. More messages came. Some pleading, some manipulative. Some wrapped in guilt like cheap wrapping paper. "Family doesn't abandon each other. You should have told us what you were doing. This hurts us, you know." But I felt nothing. No guilt. No panic. Only clarity. They wanted credit, not connection. The situation escalated when someone back home posted publicly, bragging about being related to me. They claimed my success was thanks to my strong family values. The lie stung not because it fooled anyone, but because it reminded me just how effortlessly they rewrote the past to paint themselves as victims or heroes, never the villains. People began asking questions. Old acquaintances reached out, puzzled about my disappearance. Some accused me of being dramatic for cutting contact. Others apologized for things they didn't do, but still felt guilty for witnessing. The storm grew louder. I stayed silent. During meetings with the city or interviews with staff, I pretended nothing was happening. I focused on the kids, on the community we had built. But every night, when my phone lit up with more messages from numbers I had deleted years ago, I felt the past pressing in, demanding a place in the new world I had built. But the truth was simple and unshakable. This world wasn't built for them. This version of me wasn't theirs to claim. The morning of the opening ceremony felt unreal, like stepping into a version of my life I wouldn't have believed possible a few years earlier. The building stood tall and bright, painted in colors chosen by the kids themselves: warm yellows, hopeful blues, a mural of rising hands stretching across the entrance. The Chosen One's Youth Center was no longer a distant dream. It was solid, real, and full of the kind of laughter that echoes against walls and refuses to fade. Staff members rushed around setting up tables, arranging chairs, testing microphones. The air buzzed with excitement, pride, and the kind of purpose that fills a space to its corners. I tried to focus on the final details, but my mind drifted in quiet waves, returning again and again to the same thought: everything in this room existed, because I chose to walk away from the people who once taught me I wasn't worth showing up for. As guests began to arrive, familiar faces from the community greeted me with hugs and congratulations. Some of the kids I had met years ago, now taller, braver, louder, handed out programs with practiced smiles. They had grown into themselves, and knowing I had played even a small part in that was a feeling too full to put into words. I was standing with the mayor discussing the new mentorship programs when I noticed a shift near the entrance. A ripple of whispered recognition moving through the crowd. My stomach tightened long before I turned to see what they were reacting to. My family stood just inside the doorway. For a moment, the air around me thinned. They looked strangely small in the crowd. My mother clutching her purse like a shield, my father staring with a rigid, expectant expression, my siblings behind them wearing the awkward half-smiles of people who aren't sure how welcome they are. They hadn't changed much. Same posture. Same judgment lingering in their eyes. They looked at me like I was still theirs, still the child they could summon back with a single gesture. But I wasn't. They moved through the crowd as if approaching a daughter in a school play they had shown up late to. My mother opened her arms slightly, as if anticipating the emotional reunion she had likely rehearsed in her head. I turned away before they reached me and walked toward the stage. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, grounded. I wasn't that forgotten girl anymore. When I stepped up to the podium, the crowd settled into a silence thick with attention. I took a breath and let the moment stretch, the weight of my journey resting comfortably on my shoulders. I spoke about the center, its mission, its heart, the kids who inspired it. I saw my family shift in their seats, leaning forward, hungry to hear their names, their sacrifices, their imagined influence. But instead, I told the truth. I told the audience how absence can shape a person, how silence can become a teacher, how being overlooked can ignite a fire that refuses to go out. I thanked the people who stood beside me, the mentors, the volunteers, the youth who trusted me. And then, with my voice soft but unwavering, I thanked those who didn't show up when I needed them most, because their absence pushed me to build a life where I was no longer waiting for anyone to choose me. My family stiffened. My mother's smile faltered. My father's jaw tightened, but I didn't look directly at them. I spoke to the room, to the kids listening with wide eyes, to the version of myself who once cried at empty seats and unanswered messages. After the applause, loud, warm, real, my family tried to approach me. My mother reached for my hand, the gesture trembling with desperation. "Ariel," she said softly, trying to pull me backward into a name that no longer fit. I stepped away gently, not harshly. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. "I'm not Ariel," I said. "And you're not a part of my life." Her eyes filled with tears she should have shed years ago. My father opened his mouth to argue, but the words never made it out. I turned and walked away, not out of spite, but out of peace, the kind of peace that comes from choosing yourself fully. Outside, the late afternoon sun warmed my face. The sounds of the celebration drifted through the open doors, laughter and music blending into something beautifully alive. I felt weightless, not because I had escaped something, but because I had outgrown it. For the first time, I walked forward without looking back, not running, not hiding, simply moving toward the life I built with my own hands. A life where I finally belonged.